Yeah, I mean, this book, I saw it primarily as really a true crime book. It's most of what I'm writing about is what's gone on Wall Street in the last 10 or 15 years, and it's each of the chapters really details a different crime scheme, but they all kind of fall under the general category of an overall atmosphere of lawlessness and crime. And to me, the politics are an element of this crime scheme. You know, a lot of what happened in the last 10 or 15 years was incredibly complicated and scary, and people craved some kind of explanation for what went on. And the Tea Party was one of the only places where they were giving people an explanation. It wasn't a good one, but it was something that could be explained in 5-10 seconds. They basically said that the government, in essence, was forcing banks to lend money to unworthy recipients, and that's how we had this explosion, this mortgage bubble, and that was an explanation that was believable, that could be communicated on television effectively, and it was very seductive to a lot of people who were craving a simpler time, a time when you don't have to make an intellectual commitment to understanding your own economic future. And no, really, I mean, I think that people really, it's so intimidating, this stuff, that you know, the idea that when Michelle Bachmann gets up there and she essentially says, you know, you don't have to be a genius to you know, to understand the economy or to have an opinion on it. Look at me, I'm no genius. I'm like, I'm really not a genius.
And we all agree.
Yeah, exactly. And you can be just like me and not get it at all, and it'll all still work out somehow. Greenspan, you know, a lot of the people that I talked to, they described his career as having a lot more in common with, you know, famous con men like, you know, the Maharishi that the Beatles followed, or L. Ron Hubbard, or somebody like that, because his real strength was in, you know, meeting with powerful people and convincing them that he knew what he was talking about. Where, you know, he developed this incredible reputation for being a great prognosticator and economist, but in fact, if you go back and look at his record, he was really wrong about pretty much everything, every prediction he ever made.
Yes.
Two things. First, a clarification. When you said that Greenspan was the biggest asshole in the world,
Universe. It was Universe.
oh, the universe. Sorry. I mean, is he really the biggest asshole, or that's just?
It's a little bit hyperbolic, probably. I mean, you know, Stalin and, you know, Pol Pot. I'm sure those guys are Jeffrey Dahmer. I mean, he's not that bad, but, you know, just in terms of all this stuff, he seemed like the primary asshole to these things.
I mean, he had the most independent method of screwing around with the economy,
right,
and allowing all of this to happen.
Right, and he
again,
lots
of other people, obviously.
He symbolized also an ideology or an anti-ideology, which was this whole notion of, you know, on the one hand saying the government has no role in the economy and there should be no regulation whatsoever and no taxes, and there should be, you know, nothing but the armed forces and police. That's the only legitimate role for government. On the other hand, he built this massive welfare state for the financial services industry, and that basic contradiction is kind of what the modern economy is all about. And on the one hand, we have this proto-capitalist ideology that they're selling to the public, but the reality is something entirely different. I mean, that was the amazing thing about Obama, who I really liked when I covered him on the campaign trail. You know, he instantly brought all these people who had been close to Bob Rubin, including Tim Geithner, who, and, you know, there were a whole series of them. And he essentially reinstalled the whole Rubin economic team. They were the very people who had passed not only Gramm-Leach-Bliley, but this thing called the Commodity Futures Modernization Act of 2000, which was really Rubin and Phil Gramm on the other side, the Republicans. And this was a law that affirmatively deregulated the derivatives market and made possible the mortgage bubble, among other things, because
and
of
Enron, right?
And Enron, right? Yeah, and that happened. That particular law is hilarious because the CMFA has a provision in it that actually says that state gambling laws shall not be applied to derivatives, because derivatives are so much like gambling. They had to specifically exempt what credit default swaps and other things like that are from state gambling laws, because otherwise they would have been illegal. And that law was passed again as Rubin went out the door, but it was all these people who came back again in 2008.
Everything was all a volume game.
Right.
Everything was all
Right.
like, as long as we can create more product, as long as we can rate more product, we're just going to keep on raking it in.
Right.
Until, that's a good, hot potato is the right word for it, until it all stops, and at least we won't be the ones holding it. So the big investment banks got rid of it in like Iceland and Norway and like the California State Pension Fund and,
Right.
and basically, and the rest to the Fed and really the Treasury Department and us who are guaranteeing a lot of the waste.
Sure, and that was the end of the chain. It was a hot potato that was passed from these countrywides to Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan Chase to these investors. And how many people here have a state pension? Anybody here? Yeah. Well, you're probably you're invested in mortgage-backed securities, so they passed some of it to you, and then ultimately they laid off a bunch of it with AIG, and then when AIG couldn't pay off, they basically got us to buy it.
So basically, the same guy who got screwed in the beginning
Right.
to take the loan he couldn't have is actually paying
Taxes.
to support all the manifestations of that loan.
It's a circle. Yeah, it goes straight from the original guy who gets ripped off, and he ends up
He
paying
gets ripped off
twice.
twice.
Exactly,
Right.
and that's all of us,
Right.
basically.
Yeah.
Sir.
So this phase two, this is really the way I love how this led in. What I really want to see you do your investigative topic on is what you call the ruling oligarchy, which we're talking about right now. And I think if you want to get to the answers to this question, you need to go to Skull and Bones, IEL, the trial behind all this.
You know what, though? Just to cut you off really quickly, I mean, this whole notion of conspiracy theories and conspiracies, this stuff is a conspiracy. It's open. They don't have they don't have to hide. They don't have to get together. And that's what I think this all idea of the Bilderbergs, the Trilateral Commission, it gets people not focused on. If they just actually look directly at it, they would see, powerful forces acting in concert against their own interests. And obviously there are things that happen behind the scenes, in September 2008. But this isn't like a secret Skull and Bones society. This is Warren Buffett and Jamie Dimon and Lloyd Blankfein on the phone with Hank Paulson in the middle of all these bailouts, deciding who's going to buy what bank and how much federal assistance they're going to get. It's an open conspiracy. I mean, I don't think it has to be sexier than that.
No, but it is. But they are behind it, and it's international. And when you start to really look at what the Trilateral Commission does and who they are.
Just again, to quote H.L. Mencken, sir, you may be right.
But it goes back to what can we do? We can at least pretend. We can at least talk about it and not pretend that it's not happening. So I think a lot of it's also a dialogue, and I think certainly Griftopia connects all the dots so well that it's a good thing to have, just to even have those conversations. Aside from the fact that it's a really wonderful read. So anyway, thank you
so much. And thanks for everybody for coming.
Thank you.